From the moment I first stepped into Ms. Rehnuma's classroom, I knew she wasn't like the other teachers. There was a presence about her, quiet, commanding, and impossibly graceful. She didn't raise her voice unnecessarily, yet every word she spoke seemed to linger in the air, almost tangible, leaving a faint echo long after she had moved on. Her posture was perfect, her gestures precise, and there was a meticulousness in the way she arranged her papers and books that made the whole room feel ordered, almost sacred. As a final-year literature student, I had come across my fair share of strict teachers, but none who carried such an aura of calm authority. The way she corrected a mispronounced word or gently challenged a student's argument left the entire class alert, attentive, almost in awe, and yet, beneath that professional exterior, there was something softer. A flicker of warmth she allowed to surface only for a fleeting moment, often in a smile that barely touched her lips. That was the moment I first felt my heart skip, though I quickly chided myself. She was my teacher. Admiration was one thing. Anything beyond that was forbidden. I started finding reasons to linger after class. Sometimes it was to return a misplaced notebook, other times to ask about a literary reference, though I knew the questions were only excuses to be near her. One afternoon, golden sunlight poured through the tall windows and caught the corner of her desk. She was reviewing essays, her hair falling lightly across her cheek. I watched her quietly, fascinated by the delicate way she held her pen, how her eyes softened when she read something that struck her, how she would bite the tip of her pencil when deep in thought. She looked up and caught me staring. For a heartbeat, our eyes locked, and I felt the air between us thrum with something I couldn't name. Curiosity, amusement, perhaps a shared acknowledgement of the unspoken tension. "Focus on your final project, not your teacher," she said, her voice teasing but gentle, her lips twitching into the faintest smile. It was enough to make my chest tighten in a way I hadn't experienced before. In that moment, I realized the complexity of her presence. She was formidable, yet inviting, distant, yet deeply human. I admired her intellect, her poise, her strength, but I also found myself noticing the subtler details. The way her hand rested lightly on the papers, the warmth of her voice when she wasn't speaking to the class, the small laugh that escaped her when she was alone in the staff room. I left that day with a strange mix of awe and longing, walking down the sunlit corridor with the sound of her heels fading behind me, and the quiet realization that I had crossed a line in my own mind. She was my teacher, and yet, without even trying, she had unsettled me, made me aware of something new stirring inside me, something that had nothing to do with lessons or grades, and everything to do with her. The week after that sunlight-streaked afternoon passed in a blur of lectures and assignments, yet my thoughts kept returning to her, to the way her smile had lingered, to the subtle warmth in her voice that seemed meant only for me. Then came the invitation I hadn't expected. The literature fair was approaching, and she asked if I could stay after class to help her organize the displays and materials. Everyone else had left by then, leaving the echo of footsteps and the gentle hum of ceiling fans as our only companions. Walking into the empty classroom that evening, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness. The air was cooler than outside, carrying the faint scent of chalk and old books, intertwined with her subtle perfume. She was already there, arranging stacks of novels and delicate paper cutouts for the fair. Her corda brushed against the floor as she moved, her hair loosely tied, and for the first time, she didn't seem like the untouchable teacher I saw in class. She looked approachable, yet still mesmerizing, the kind of presence that made the room itself feel different. We worked side by side, our movements careful, almost choreographed. Every time our hands brushed while passing a stack of books, my pulse betrayed me. She noticed, of course, and gave me a fleeting glance. Not admonishing, not embarrassed, just acknowledging. Her eyes softened when she talked about her favorite novels, the way they shaped her thoughts, and the characters she had loved so fiercely that they almost felt like friends. I found myself leaning in, genuinely interested, but also secretly wanting to stay close, to hear the warmth in her voice. Our conversation drifted beyond literature. She asked about my family, my childhood, my small regrets and quiet ambitions. I found myself answering honestly, drawn by the trust in her tone, the gentle curiosity that felt safe yet exhilarating. And then she laughed. A sound so rare, so unguarded, that I froze for a moment just to let it linger. It wasn't the controlled smile she wore in class. It was spontaneous, heartfelt, and it reached her eyes in a way that made me wonder how many people had ever truly seen that side of her. As we packed up the last of the materials, she paused, looking at me with a faint tilt of her head. "You're a good listener, Ayan," she said softly, almost like she was confessing something to herself. "Sometimes I forget how rare that is." The words hit me unexpectedly, stirring something deeper than admiration. A quiet pull toward her, tempered by the unspoken rules of our roles. Walking home that evening, the echo of her laughter and the warmth of her glance followed me. I realized that these after-hours moments were dangerous, in the sense that they blurred the lines I had tried so hard to respect. Yet, there was something intoxicating about the way she had let me into her world, if only briefly. Something that whispered of possibilities I wasn't supposed to consider, the tension of unspoken attraction, of a connection that neither of us yet dared to name. For the first time, I understood that admiration alone could feel like desire, that a touch, a glance, a shared laugh could carry weight heavier than any spoken word, and I found myself longing for the next evening, the next quiet moment, when the world outside would disappear, leaving only her and me, and the fragile tension that neither of us was ready to confront, yet neither could ignore. The following week, a sense of quiet anticipation settled over me like a soft shadow. Ms. Rehnuma had asked me to come in a bit earlier the evening before the literature fair, to help set up the reading corner. It was an ordinary request, yet something in her tone, calm but not casual, made my stomach flutter. I couldn't tell if it was curiosity, excitement, or simply the magnetic pull of being near her outside the structured walls of the classroom. When I arrived, the school corridors were almost empty, the echo of my footsteps bouncing gently off the polished floors. The smell of paper and dust lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the soft metallic scent of the door handles. Her car was the only one in the parking lot, and for a moment, I hesitated, feeling as though I were stepping into a different world. One that existed just for her, and for me in her company. Inside the classroom, she moved gracefully, arranging small candles and stacks of books in a careful, deliberate pattern. The soft flicker of candlelight caught her profile, highlighting the delicate curve of her jaw and the gentle slope of her shoulders. She was dressed simply, a light blue kurta that framed her figure modestly, hair loosely tied, a few strands escaping to brush her cheek. In that moment, she didn't look like the strict, untouchable teacher from class. She looked a human, real, alive. We worked in companionable silence at first, the occasional scrape of a chair or rustle of paper the only sounds filling the room. The subtle warmth of her presence wrapped around me like a soft cloak. Each time our hands brushed, passing books, adjusting candles, a small thrill ran through me. She didn't pull away. Her fingers lingered just slightly longer than necessary, and I felt a quiet acknowledgement in that subtle touch. The conversation soon drifted from practical matters to the personal, safe topics at first, like favorite authors and memorable lines from novels. Then, almost imperceptibly, it shifted. She asked about my family, my life beyond the university, and I found myself speaking freely, the words spilling out as though her eyes could see the truths I often hid even from myself. When she shared fragments of her own life, moments of joy, small regrets, fleeting loneliness, her voice carried a softness, a vulnerability I had never noticed in class. At one point, our eyes met, holding each other in a gaze that lingered longer than either of us expected. I could feel her awareness of me in that instant, a recognition beyond teacher and student, a quiet curiosity mirrored in my own expression. The air felt thick, almost tactile, charged with something delicate yet undeniable. Then she said, her voice teasing yet edged with sincerity, "You make me forget I'm supposed to be the responsible one." The words were casual, playful on the surface, but there was a weight behind them, a hint of something she didn't yet dare to name. My pulse quickened, not just from the words themselves, but from the shared understanding that something unspoken existed between us. Fragile, dangerous, and irresistibly magnetic. As I left that evening, my steps were lighter, my thoughts entangled with her presence. The school was silent, yet I could still feel the warmth of her gaze lingering on me, an invisible thread connecting us. I knew, without a doubt, that the evening had changed something, quietly, irrevocably, and that the tension we had begun to feel could no longer be ignored. It was waiting patiently for the right moment to surface. The days following that evening were unusually quiet. In class, Ms. Rehnuma returned to her usual self, composed, precise, almost impervious. The warm, playful aura from our after-hours meeting seemed to have vanished, replaced by the familiar authority that made students sit straighter and take careful notes. I watched her from my seat, noticing the slight tension in her shoulders, the faint crease between her brows when she lectured. It was as if she were carefully reinforcing the boundaries we had quietly breached. For my part, I struggled with the sudden distance. My heart still thudded whenever I remembered her soft laughter, the subtle brush of her hand against mine, the intimate conversation that had made the classroom walls disappear. But in her absence of warmth, the tension became a quiet ache. I began questioning myself. Had I imagined it all? Was I misreading her kindness and attentiveness as something more? I hated the thought, yet I couldn't deny the pull I felt, the strange, thrilling weight of attraction that simmered beneath my respect for her role as my teacher. After class one afternoon, I lingered longer than usual, pretending to organize my notes while hoping for a chance to speak with her. She finally looked up from the papers she was grading, her gaze brief, formal, yet carrying a softness I recognized. "Ayan," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "Did I do something to make you uncomfortable?" The question caught me off guard. My instincts screamed to reassure her, to tell her how much that evening had meant to me, how her presence lingered in my thoughts like a delicate flame. Yet I held back, careful not to cross the invisible line we had both drawn. "No, ma'am," I replied softly. I just wanted to make sure I'm respecting your boundaries." She sighed, a sound so quiet it could have been mistaken for the shifting of papers, yet it carried the weight of unspoken feelings. Her eyes, usually so composed, held a flicker of vulnerability. "You haven't," she said slowly, almost to herself. "I did. I forgot, for a moment, that there are rules we must follow." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken emotion, before I nodded, not knowing whether to feel relief or heartache. Her words revealed the conflict I had sensed all along. She had let herself be human, let herself feel, and now recoiled to maintain the role she believed necessary. It was a line between us, professional, societal, and self-imposed, that neither of us could ignore, no matter how magnetic the connection had become. I left the classroom that day with a strange mixture of respect and longing. I understood the boundaries, but the ache of what had begun remained, simmering quietly beneath my skin. Even in the days that followed, every glance she cast, every faint smile, carried a tension I couldn't resolve. It was a delicate dance, an unspoken negotiation between desire and decorum, each of us tiptoeing around feelings too strong to deny, yet too fraught with consequence to explore freely. For the first time, I realized the complexity of her world and the fragility of ours. She was my teacher, yes, but she was also a woman with fears, desires, and an undeniable allure that made ignoring her impossible. And in that quiet tension, I sensed the story had only just begun, that the rules we were following were not just lines in the sand, but threads waiting to be pulled, tested, and ultimately redefined. A week of quiet distance passed, filled with polite nods in class and careful avoidance of lingering eye contact. I felt the tension between us like a taut string, vibrating with everything unsaid. Then came her message, simple but loaded. Could I visit her home to drop off some materials for the literature fair? My heart raced as I read it, and I hesitated only a moment before replying. Something about the invitation carried an intimacy that the classroom never allowed. Her apartment was just a short walk from the college, tucked into a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees. When I arrived, The scent of jasmine and warm tea drifted into the corridor, greeting me before I even knocked. The door opened, and there she was. Not the authoritative figure from the lecture hall, but a woman at ease in her own space, smiling with a warmth that made my chest ache. Her kurta was soft-colored, her hair loosely pinned, and for a moment I forgot entirely that she was my teacher. She looked simply human. We settled into the living room, tea steaming gently on the table between us. She apologized softly for her recent distance, explaining that sometimes, when feelings came too close, she retreated behind the safe walls of professionalism. "It's not you," she said, voice almost breaking. "It's me. I just forget how to handle this sometimes." I listened, heart tightening, realizing how rare it was to see her like this, stripped of her control, letting the vulnerability show in subtle tremors of her voice and the faint quiver of her hands as she poured the tea. Our conversation wandered, unhurried, like a river finding its course. She spoke about her younger years, the quiet loneliness of teaching, the moments when she had longed for someone to see her, really see her and understand. I shared my own fears, my small regrets, the ambitions that weighed on me as I navigated the final year of college. Every word, every pause, built a bridge between us, a fragile connection neither of us had dared to form before. When she reached for the teapot to refill my cup, her fingers brushed mine ever so lightly. I didn't pull away. Instead, I held the teacup steady, feeling the electricity of the touch, soft, fleeting, yet profoundly intimate. Our eyes met, and I saw in her a mixture of amusement, longing, and hesitation. The strict teacher from class was gone. In her place was a woman who could laugh, who could falter, who could allow someone else, me, to be a part of her private world. Then, in that quiet, warm room, she smiled, a soft, mischievous curve of her lips, and said, almost teasingly, "In class, I'm strict, but tonight, maybe I'll let you break a few rules." The words hung between us, playful yet loaded with meaning, hinting at something deeper than mere mischief. I felt the tension of unspoken attraction, the thrill of shared understanding, and the fragile hope that perhaps this moment could change everything. It wasn't about crossing lines or forbidden desire. It was about acknowledgement, of feelings, of human connection, of the delicate intimacy that grows in moments of vulnerability. And in that room, with the scent of jasmine and the warmth of tea surrounding us, I understood that we were stepping into uncharted territory, together, yet with caution, aware of both the thrill and the risk. The evening air carried a quiet stillness as I arrived at her apartment again, a mix of anticipation and nervous energy coursing through me. The city outside seemed distant, blurred by the soft glow of streetlights and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Inside, the room was warm, the faint scent of jasmine and old books wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. She greeted me with that soft, effortless smile, the one that always seemed to belong to a world far away from the classroom, a world I longed to be part of. We began casually, talking about the fair preparations, arranging books and decorations with an easy rhythm. But soon, the conversation drifted, as it always did, into personal territory. Our dreams, regrets, the quiet ache of life's little disappointments. She spoke about teaching, about how it had made her strong yet occasionally lonely. I confessed my own uncertainties, my desire to be understood beyond the role of a student, beyond the polite masks we wore in public. There was a moment when we both fell silent, the kind of silence that thrums with unspoken emotion. The flicker of candlelight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the curve of her jaw, the softness in her eyes, the vulnerability she rarely let anyone see. It was in that silence that I realized just how much I cared. Not in a rash, reckless way, but with a slow, consuming certainty that grew stronger with each passing heartbeat. The electricity between us was subtle but undeniable. When she laughed quietly, brushing her hair behind her ear, the gesture felt intimate, and I longed to reach out, to hold the small, trembling warmth in her hand. My own restraint battled with desire, each glance a tentative negotiation of boundaries. And yet, the tension between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was alive, charged with a tenderness that neither of us had allowed ourselves to acknowledge fully before. Finally, I broke the silence. "You've taught me more than books ever could," I said, my voice low, deliberate. She looked up, her eyes shimmering, a mix of surprise and something deeper. Perhaps relief, perhaps longing. She stepped closer, the warmth of her presence washing over me, and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. It was not a claim, not a demand. It was acknowledgement, recognition, a gentle permission to exist in that shared space without fear or pretense. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You've reminded me that I can still feel something real," she admitted. The words hung in the golden half-dark of the room, delicate and profound. In that moment, the rules that had governed our interactions, the roles of teacher and student, of authority and respect, faded into the background. What remained was a raw, human connection, fragile yet undeniable, full of longing and tenderness. We stood there, close but careful, letting the emotions speak in the silence, in the brush of hands, in the lingering glance that said more than words ever could. There was no rush, no reckless abandon. Only the quiet confirmation that we had crossed an invisible line together, a line drawn not in violation, but in understanding and shared feeling. That night was not about breaking rules for the sake of rebellion. It was about recognizing the truth of our emotions, about allowing ourselves to feel, to connect, and to be seen in our entirety. By the time I left, the city outside had grown quieter, the stars brighter. I walked home with a strange lightness in my chest, knowing that something profound had shifted between us. An intimacy that could never be erased, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could diminish. The morning sunlight spilled gently through the sheer curtains, brushing the room with a soft, golden glow. The world outside moved on as usual, but inside her apartment, the air was still charged with the quiet intensity of the night before. I arrived, almost hesitantly, unsure if the delicate tension between us would have dissolved or lingered like the faint scent of jasmine that always seemed to follow her. She was standing by the window, looking out at the quiet street, the sunlight catching her hair in soft highlights. She didn't turn immediately, yet I knew she felt my presence, as if we had silently agreed that the world outside could wait while we existed in our own suspended moment. There was no awkwardness, no need for hurried conversation. Just the calm, natural ease of two people who had shared something significant and understood its weight. Her voice finally broke the silence, low and thoughtful. "Life gives us moments, Ayan," she said, not looking at me, letting the words float between us. "Some are meant to stay with us, and some are meant to teach us something we didn't realize we needed to learn." I nodded, feeling the depth of what she meant. That night, we had broken no rules that mattered, yet we had crossed boundaries that had always existed in our hearts. Boundaries of distance, hesitation, and unspoken longing. We moved through the morning in quiet companionship, the comfort of shared understanding filling the space between us. She made tea again, this time without a hint of nervousness, and offered me a gentle smile when I reached for my cup. The simplicity of the act, the ordinary warmth of being in her presence, felt extraordinary. We laughed softly over minor details of the fare, over spilled sugar and crooked book stacks, and it felt natural, effortless, as if the events of the previous night had not been taboo but inevitable. When we finally sat together on the sofa, our shoulders brushed, and it was not accidental. It was a silent acknowledgement of closeness, a reaffirmation that the bond we had formed was real, grounded, and mutual. Her hand hovered briefly over mine, as though testing the comfort of proximity, and I didn't move away. There was no rush, no dramatic confessions or grand gestures. Only the warmth of presence, the understanding that we had discovered a connection deeper than labels, deeper than fear, and that it could exist quietly, gently, in its own time. Before I left, she walked me to the door, the soft click of the lock echoing like a punctuation mark in our shared story. She looked up at me, eyes bright and calm, and smiled. A smile that carried confidence, care, and an almost mischievous acknowledgement of what we now shared. "Remember," she said softly, "some rules are worth following, and some moments are worth keeping." I stepped outside into the morning light, my chest light and my heart steady. For the first time, I understood that our story wasn't about rebellion or fleeting desire. It was about recognition, recognizing each other, recognizing the quiet strength and vulnerability, and honoring the delicate intimacy that had grown between us. As I walked down the street, the sunlight warm on my shoulders, I realized that what had happened wasn't a fleeting infatuation. It was a slow, unfolding truth, that love, respect, and human connection could exist even where society and circumstance tried to impose distance. And in that gentle morning, I carried with me the memory of her smile, the softness of her touch, and the unspoken promise that our hearts had found a quiet, enduring place in each other's lives.